your home with BuildAid on Mix 93.8. Proudly brought to you by AfriSam. AfriSam, creating concrete possibilities.
BuildAid on Mix 93.8 FM. Good evening. My name's Graham Alexander. In the studio as usual, Kay looking after all of us and Simon looking after the desk. I'm going to be chatting to Monica Albonica and Abdul Aziz Abed. They are both in urban design and we're going to be chatting about high streets. And the few that we're going to pick is Grant Avenue in Norwood and 4th Avenue in Parkhurst.
Absolute jewels. We're also talking about another jewel tonight, and I know every single person out there remembers this one. Last week I went a little bit hippie on you and asked you to remember the cherry-faced lurchers. Quite a few of you did, but this one, it was a club in downtown Jersey, and it started its club life as a club called Heaven. That was in the 80s, but it became hugely popular when it opened its doors in 1990. So if you know which club I'm talking about, send us an SMS on 41348. Talking about building in Johannesburg. And my guests this afternoon, Monica Albonica and Abdul Aziz Abed, we're going to be chatting about high streets. Guys, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having us.
Monica, just a quick intro. You're an architect, you're involved in urban planning, urban design and so on. And one of our streets that we're going to be chatting about is Grant Avenue. Give us a little bit of an insight on how you got involved.
I think it's a great place in Johannesburg. I'm sure many people know about it. This actually came about from an initiative at the city looking at developing a better understanding how these spaces were functioning, the kind of economic bit and activities that were actually sustaining these places and how they could make it work better. And I think that, that was the focus.
Let's understand what a high street is. And you can mention the Champs-Élysées or Long Street in Cape Town and so on. But I think, Abdul, give us a more professional definition of what a high street is.
Well, there are various types of high streets globally, and they all differ very much in terms of their nature and in terms of their performance. However, the general principle of a high street is that it's a sort of mobility link that's mixed with economic activity and accommodates a number of modes of movement and a number of activities simultaneously. They also form the hearts and the centers of towns or cities in some cases, and play a key, critical role in terms of serving the greater environment that surrounds it.
If you look at Grant Avenue and 4th Avenue in Parkhurst, one of the commonalities is they're both on a bus route. And I think were they trolley buses, electric buses?
Trams.
Trams?
Yeah.
Was that one of the main factors behind these two streets?
That's right. I mean, historically it was a transport route. It started even before the trolleys, were wagons, ox wagons, that will take you to this particular area. And then when the trolleys were introduced, obviously reinforced the character of this place, and a lot of the new development happened in a very linear fashion along this particular route.
I would guess there are certain factors, or could we call them ingredients, that would go into a successful high street. We've mentioned one, which is the mobility factor or transport route. Abdul, what are a couple of other things that would make Grant Street different to two streets below it?
Well, definitely. I mean, there's certain components like anchors. For instance, on Grant Avenue, you have the Spa building, which is the main retail anchor that pulls people towards it from the sort of surrounding vicinity. That's one of the sort of key features. You have transportation centered around it as well. But there are a number of other features as well. The type of sidewalks are very different. You obviously have a lot of retail frontage that attracts pedestrians or that starts creating an interaction and a better sort of street edge. And then also the land use mixes on many high streets. For instance, Grant Avenue has predominantly 2 to 3 story buildings, some accommodating residential mixed with a few offices and either entertainment or retail on the ground floor.
We're going to come back and chat about the organic growth of some of the old-fashioned, if I could call them that, high streets, as opposed to newer high streets like in Maboneng. BuildAid on Mix 93.8. My name's Graham Alexander. We're chatting about urbanization, but an exciting subject tonight, which is high streets, important streets, busy streets. I looked for the definition of high street, and they said it's very British, which I didn't quite understand. And I thought, what is this sort of order, high or low or whatever? But I think we've gathered that it's an important street. It's where everything happens. There's something happening in Johannesburg called Maboneng, and it's basically trying to create a space. How does it differ, Monica, to one of, if we can call them, the old-fashioned streets like Grant Avenue?
I think the fundamental difference is that, for example, in Maboneng came about from a single vision developer, somebody who initiate the concept and obviously control quite a lot of the properties, almost infuse an identity to that particular area, which is quite consistent, attract a particular group of people, like a lot of creative sector, which reinforce the kind of character that was trying to create, and definitely have made a fantastic place that a lot of people like to visit. And I think it's not to take value out, but it's actually, the process is different. When you look at Grant Avenue, something that happened through the initiative of different developers, different property owners, different shopkeepers. Therefore, it's a lot richer and tend to actually be a lot more sustainable if you look at historically, because it's got that vibrancy that is given by the individuals.
So the older streets, the more established streets, and that organic growth, does it, as you said, it's got a lot of character, but there are probably 1,000 reasons why it has that character. Buildings have been stuck together, pulled apart, added on, and so on. And so this thing evolves in an eclectic sort of fashion. Would that be a sort of a fundamental difference? Is the one has been planned, and it could be correctly planned, like Maboneng has. The others also sort of did it on its own.
I think Monica said it already. There's a fundamental difference there between almost precincts like Maboneng, which have been curated and thought out, and there's a single developer, and obviously other high streets like Grant Avenue, which have a multitude of property owners, developers. There's a rental market that exists as well, and people are incredibly protective over their environments. And with that being the case, they tend to adapt certain things, and that changes the nature of high streets in a very different way. And I think that's how the overall development of either sort of a curated precinct or a more organic precinct evolves.
Monica, when you looked at Grant Avenue, and I keep calling it street because we're talking about high streets, Grant Avenue, what were your first impressions, and what did you need to do, or what did the street need to do to revitalize? What were the important ingredients?
I think in terms of the mix of uses, we found that if we're comparing the number of shops that existed along the street, it was actually a lot more than what you will find in Norwood Shopping Centre, for example. And it was actually quite surprising. A much more variety of shops and outlets. That was obviously attracting different kind of consumer, different kind of community user. What was lacking is the quality of environment. I think over the years, it's got a fantastic historical patina. Lovely buildings with colonnades and really that evoke the old Johannesburg is still there. New buildings that have actually built almost responded to the historical character and actually done very good adaptive reuses of the existing buildings. Therefore, in terms of the architectural character, is quite unique. What was lacking is the street environment that could accommodate pedestrians as well as the vehicular movement. It seems to, and it's still the case today, the car is giving more space and more predominance over the pedestrian.
I was going to bring a tune in to the station. Kay was by Petula Clark called Downtown, and she sings about the sound of a city, the energy of a city that is attractive, but you can't really define it. Monica and Abdul, as professionals and designers, you have good ideas, you go into a space and so on, but you've got to sell it to somebody. This must be a tough exercise, particularly if it's a street. You're not talking to one developer, you're talking to 50 shop owners.
I think it's a very interesting point that you're making. And as designers, I always say that we're not just designers that sit behind a desk and draw all day, but we're also deal makers. And that's the most critical part, is understanding the politics around a current situation. In the case of a high street, how community members relate to each other, and whether there's a sense of cohesiveness there, and looking at the underlying sort of dynamics. And then only can your design sort of be implemented if it's done properly, because the people themselves are the implementers. And every community differs, and there's always a soft spot in each and every community, and it's up to you to identify that and press on or gently massage that soft spot in order for things to proceed.
As Joburgers, it's so good to know that there are professionals like you guys out there. You're planning the city, you're thinking about the city, and you know we're going to talk about this a lot on this show during this year. Kay, what was the answer?
Oh, the answer was the doors. So well done to all of you who got it right. And I've just got another message to say Baba J's is in Attersville, Benoni. So there's a doors reunion happening on the 11th of Feb, if you're keen.
And there's a cafe down the road.
Is there?
It's in Benoni.
Oh, yeah, it must be. And a roadhouse. Yeah,
Yeah.
all those good things.
Thanks to Simon on the desk, to Kay for looking after all of us, and Ian, the videographer. Remember, you can check the show out on YouTube. But more importantly, thank you to Monica and Abdul for coming to chat to us about Joburg. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's really been very exciting to be here.
Up next is the greatest show on earth. We do this every Wednesday between 6 and 7. Chat you next week. Ciao.
Your home with BuildAid on Mix brings you all sorts of interesting info about building. Graham Alexander chats to different guests every Wednesday evening between 6 and 7. Proudly brought to you by AfriSam. AfriSam, creating concrete possibilities.